Picture this. It's late 322, maybe early 321 BC. And you're standing on this dusty road in the ancient Middle East.
Right.
And rumbling toward you is just, I mean, it's the most extravagant funeral procession the world has literally ever seen.
It is massive.
Yeah, we are talking about a giant golden carriage, like engineered specifically to carry the body of Alexander the Great on this slow, deliberate march all the way back to Macedon.
And the stakes for who controls that procession,
Yeah.
They're unfathomable.
Exactly. And then out of nowhere, one of Alexander's former bodyguards swoops in, physically hijacks the conqueror's corpse, and just reroutes the entire caravan to Egypt.
It is, without a doubt, one of the most audacious heists in human history.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the theft of the ultimate symbol of imperial legitimacy.
Right, out from under the nose of the standing government.
Exactly. Just snatched it.
So the mastermind who actually pulled this off was a Macedonian general named Ptolemy I. And that's what today's deep dive into our sources is all about. We're unpacking the mechanics of his survival.
Because Ptolemy didn't just, survive the chaotic, blood-soaked fallout of Alexander's death.
No, he engineered a 300-year dynasty, the same dynasty that famously ended with Cleopatra VII.
That's really incredible when you think about it.
Right. So if you're listening to this and wondering how leaders navigate catastrophic power vacuums, Ptolemy's playbook is basically a masterclass. Defensive architecture, economic manipulation, narrative control. He did it all.
And the broader context here is just so critical because Ptolemy wasn't the obvious heir to the empire. Not at all.
Right. He was just a guy.
Well, a very capable guy.
Yeah.
But his success really stems from understanding the difference between the illusion of power and the actual boring levers of administration.
Right. The real plumbing. So let's start with the heist itself, because to understand why someone takes the massive risk of stealing their boss's dead body.
Which is huge.
Yeah. We have to look at his proximity to the throne. He wasn't just some rank-and-file soldier.
Right. Far from it. Ptolemy was a Macedonian Greek. He was born around 369 or 368 BC to a nobleman named Legis and a woman named Arsinoe.
Okay.
And he actually served with Alexander from his earliest campaigns. He rose to become one of the 7 Somatophylakes.
The what?
Somatophylakes. They were the elite royal bodyguards. But honestly, the title is almost deceptive.
How so? Like, they weren't just the guys standing at the door looking tough.
Exactly. They weren't just muscle. They were the inner circle of staff officers. I mean, Ptolemy held independent military commands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he most notably captured the rebel Bessus in Afghanistan.
Okay, so he's a serious player.
Very serious. So when Alexander dies suddenly in Babylon, this is in 323 BC, and the empire is partitioned, Ptolemy has the leverage to maneuver himself into the role of satrap.
Which is like a governor, right?
Right, governor of Egypt.
Okay, but our sources also mention this lingering rumor, something about Ptolemy actually being the illegitimate son of Philip II, which would make him Alexander's half-brother.
Ah, yes, that rumor.
Yeah. I mean, I have to wonder, did he just manufacture that rumor to justify his massive land grab?
Modern historians overwhelmingly view that rumor as a later fabrication. But, its function is really telling.
Because he needed the PR.
Basically.
Huh.
The Ptolemaic dynasty eventually needed a way to tie their bloodline directly to the greatest conquerors of the age.
Right, to look legitimate.
But in 323 BC, Ptolemy wasn't relying on fabricated bloodlines. He was relying on immediate political realities.
Because there's a guy in charge, right, Perdiccas.
Yes, the official imperial regent, Perdiccas. He controlled the central government, and he fully intended to bury Alexander in the royal tombs in Macedon.
Which would solidify his own supremacy.
Exactly. Which brings us to the mechanics of Macedonian succession. It wasn't just about reading a will or who had the best claim on paper.
Right, it's much more visceral than that.
Very. Custom actually dictated that a new king asserted his right to the throne by physically burying his predecessor.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's almost like stealing the company founder's last will and testament to automatically make yourself the new CEO.
That's a great way to put it. By hijacking the body and taking it to Memphis in Egypt, Ptolemy was systematically short-circuiting the region's claim to the throne.
He's just preempting the central authority completely.
And he wastes absolutely no time consolidating that move.
Yeah, he openly joins a military coalition against Perdiccas.
Yeah.
And then he executes his own deputy in Egypt, a guy named Cleomenes.
Right, and the execution of Cleomenes is it's a perfect example of Ptolemy understanding how power works.
Because Cleomenes was a spy.
Well, officially, yes, he was suspected of spying for Perdiccas. But by eliminating him, Ptolemy didn't just remove a rival.
What else did he get?
He legally absorbed the staggering wealth that Cleomenes had spent years hoarding in the Egyptian treasury.
Oh, wow. So he gets the money.
All of it. And he needed that capital for what was coming next.
Because, obviously, stealing the boss's body triggers a massive retaliation. You can't just do that and expect everyone to be cool with it.
No, absolutely not. Perdiccas marches the entire imperial army down to Egypt in 321 BC.
Right. And this seems to be where Ptolemy's defensive genius really kicks in.
It does. Because invading Egypt essentially requires crossing the Nile. And Ptolemy turned the river itself into a weapon.
How do you do that?
Well, the logistics of moving a heavily armored Macedonian phalanx across those currents, it was a nightmare. Ptolemy fortified all the fords, and Perdiccas' invasion just collapsed into an absolute fiasco.
I read he lost, what, 2,000 men?
2,000 men, simply trying to cross the water.
That is, I mean, that level of logistical failure has to just shatter the morale of an invading army.
It was fatal to Perdiccas' authority. His own officers mutinied and actually murdered him in his tent.
Wow.
Yeah. But the aftermath is where we really see Ptolemy's strategic restraint.
Yeah.
Because the morning after the assassination, Ptolemy crosses the river. But he doesn't slaughter the remaining enemy forces. He brings them grain.
Wait, he supplies the army that just tried to invade him?
Yes.
That is an astonishing psychological pivot. Like, hey guys, sorry about yesterday, here's some breakfast.
It really is. But it neutralizes the immediate threat, right? And it buys their loyalty. The grateful army actually offers Ptolemy the regency of the entire Macedonian Empire right there.
In place of the guy they just killed?
Exactly.
Okay, but I have to challenge the logic of what happens next.
All for it.
So he steals the body to establish legitimacy. He shatters his biggest rival. The imperial army basically hands him the keys to the entire empire, and he turns it down.
He does.
If you refuse the top job in front of your own ambitious generals, don't you look incredibly weak? I mean, how does he survive the optics of just walking away from the ultimate prize?
It's a fair question. But it really comes down to a harsh assessment of geopolitical reality.
Like, he knew it was a trap.
Kind of. Ptolemy recognized that Alexander's empire was fundamentally ungovernable. It was too vast, the supply lines were too long, and the rival generals were just too entrenched.
So whoever takes the job is just a target.
Exactly. Whoever took the regency would be fighting a war on all fronts. And that was a calculation that was proven correct by the decades of civil war that followed.
Right, so it's a conscious choice to avoid imperial overstretch.
Precisely. He preferred an impregnable fortress over a crumbling empire. Egypt was wealthy, agriculturally independent, and geographically protected by deserts and the sea.
The perfect base.
And when he did fight in the long succession wars, the conflicts of the Diadochi, he focused on securing regions like Judea, Cyprus, and Cyrenaica.
But not to conquer everything.
No, these weren't attempts to conquer Asia, they were buffer zones, designed strictly to keep the fighting far away from the Egyptian heartland.
He's basically building a strategic moat around himself.
A very expensive moat, yes.
And it clearly earned him respect. The sources note he was given the title Soter, right? Which means savior.
Yes, that was because he deployed a massive fleet to lift the siege of Rhodes when they were attacked by a rival general around 305 BC.
And they gave him divine honors for that.
Which just shows his soft power at work. But, and this is crucial, maintaining those buffer zones, fleets, and a standing mercenary army, it requires a staggering amount of capital.
Right. Military might is totally useless without an economic engine to drive it.
Exactly.
Which brings us to how you actually pay for all this. And if you're listening to this and you think of ancient economies as just, bartering grain and cattle, Ptolemy's system is going to completely change your perspective.
Oh, absolutely. He implemented a highly structured, state-controlled bureaucracy that honestly borders on total micromanagement.
Yeah, the Ptolemaic state became the primary engine of industry. They owned almost half of all the agricultural land.
And it wasn't just farming. If you were involved in the production of cloth, papyrus, or even brewing beer, you operated under stringent government oversight.
And a heavy taxation framework, I'm sure.
Very heavy. They exported grain and linen across the Mediterranean just to finance their military.
But the monetary policy is the most fascinating mechanism here, I think.
It really is brilliant.
Because before this, under Alexander, the region largely relied on standard Athenian silver coins, right?
Yes, Athenian silver was basically the US dollar of the ancient Mediterranean.
Right. But around 310 BC, Ptolemy engineers what modern economists would call a closed monetary zone.
Yes. And the mechanics of this are just genius. Egypt had almost no native silver mines, meaning silver had to be constantly imported.
Okay, so it's a weak point.
A huge weak point.
Yeah.
So to stop silver from bleeding out of his economy, Ptolemy decreed that any merchant or traveler entering Egypt had to surrender their foreign currency at the border.
Stop. It's literally like a walled garden ecosystem in modern tech or like an ancient theme park. You walk in and you're forced to exchange your real international money for local Ptolemy bucks just to do business.
That's exactly what it was, and the exchange rate was heavily manipulated.
Of course it was. How bad was the skim?
He reduced the weight of the silver and gold drachmas to 80% of their original weight.
Wow.
Essentially, the state skimmed 20% off the top of every single transaction entering the country.
Wait, if you enforce a 20% fractional devaluation overnight, doesn't that immediately trigger massive inflation? Like, wouldn't the merchant class just riot?
It would if they had a choice to go elsewhere. But because Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, merchants had to buy Egyptian grain. The demand was completely inelastic.
They couldn't just walk away. They needed the food.
Exactly.
Huh.
This allowed Ptolemy to create what was essentially a fiduciary currency, money that has value primarily because the state demands it for taxes and trade within its borders.
That is profound. He's literally forcing the entire Mediterranean to play by his financial rules.
And by 299 BC, he visualizes this independence. He stops minting coins with Alexander's face altogether and replaces them with his own portrait.
Imagine being a Greek merchant holding that new coin.
Right. For decades, Alexander's image was the universal standard of value. Swapping that out for his own face wasn't just vanity.
It's a statement.
It was a macroeconomic declaration of independence. Ptolemy was broadcasting that his legitimacy no longer derived from Alexander, but from himself as the living pharaoh.
That is so bold. Okay, so securing the borders and locking down the economy guarantees your survival in the present. But to secure a dynasty that lasts 300 years, you have to control how the future remembers you, right?
You have to monopolize knowledge.
Exactly. And the cultural infrastructure he built in his capital, Alexandria, served exactly that purpose.
It did. I mean, he initiated the construction of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, a navigational wonder. But more importantly, he founded the Library of Alexandria.
Which is so interesting because we tend to think of the library as this, benevolent public good, like a UNESCO site or something. But in this context, it feels more like a geopolitical weapon.
Oh, it was absolutely an institution of statecraft.
How so?
By offering massive stipends, tax exemptions, and resources, Ptolemy initiated a massive brain drain across the Hellenistic world.
He just bought all the smart people?
He drew the greatest mind scientists, poets, engineers, away from his rivals and into his own court.
There's a great interaction in the sources between Ptolemy and Euclid, actually, the father of geometry who Ptolemy sponsored.
Oh, yes, the famous quote.
Yeah, so supposedly Ptolemy was trying to read Euclid's foundational textbook, The Elements, and he just got frustrated. And he asks Euclid if there's a shorter, easier way to learn the material.
And Euclid replies, "Sire, there is no royal road to geometry."
I just love that. He basically told the king to do his homework.
It's a great anecdote, and it highlights that the king was personally engaging with the intellectual heavyweights of his court.
Right.
But Ptolemy wasn't content just being a patron. He took up the pen himself and wrote a detailed eyewitness history of Alexander's campaigns.
And we don't have the original text today, right?
We don't, but it survived long enough to completely shape the historical record. In the 2nd century AD, the historian Arrian used Ptolemy's account as a primary foundation for his famous work, the Anabasis.
Okay, so Arrian read it.
Yes. And Arrian explicitly states that he trusts Ptolemy's version because Ptolemy was an eyewitness, but crucially because he was a king.
Wait, what?
Arrian reasoned that lying would be more dishonorable for him than for anyone else.
I have to stop right there. The idea that a king wouldn't lie in his own memoir that is staggering naivety.
It really is.
He is writing the definitive history of a conflict where he spent decades fighting his bitter rivals for survival. How did this bias actually manifest in the text?
Well, modern historians like R.M. Arrington have done really fascinating work dismantling that naivety. They argue that Ptolemy's history was essentially a calculated exercise in character assassination.
Really? Against who?
Because Ptolemy controlled the narrative, he systematically blackened the reputation of his old rival Perdiccas.
The same Perdiccas whose body he stole from and who died in his tent at the Nile.
The very same. For instance, in the historical accounts of the fall of the city of Thebes, the narrative derived from Ptolemy assigns Perdiccas a reckless, foolish role.
Oh, wow.
And that directly contradicts other surviving accounts. Ptolemy couldn't erase Perdiccas from history, but he could ensure that future generations remembered him as an incompetent failure.
He's literally writing his enemies out of the winner's circle.
He had the pen, so he wrote the story.
That is wild. Okay, so he controls the borders, he controls the currency, he controls the history books.
Yes.
But the final vulnerability for any ruler, the mechanism that usually destroys all this careful planning, is biology.
Succession.
Yes.
The succession. The transition of power is the most dangerous moment for any autocracy. And Ptolemy's family tree was a complete political minefield.
Because he had a lot of wives.
Right. During Alexander's life, he had children with his mistress, Tygus. Later, on Alexander's orders to integrate the empires, he married a Persian noblewoman, Artacama.
Okay, that's two.
But after Alexander's death, Ptolemy needed an alliance with the old Macedonian guard. So he married Eurydice, the daughter of the powerful regent Antipater.
Which produces his eldest legitimate son, Ptolemy Keranos. And by all traditional logic, Keranos is the heir apparent, right? He has the blood of the Egyptian pharaoh and the backing of the traditional Macedonian nobility.
Which is exactly why he was dangerous.
Wait, really?
Because Ptolemy's geopolitical strategy had shifted. He was no longer trying to appease the Macedonian homeland. He was building an independent Egyptian empire.
Ah.
So he marries Eurydice's cousin-in-waiting, Berenice, and he begins to favor the son he has with her, Ptolemy II.
Oh, you can just see the factions forming. The older son, backed by foreign political connections, versus the younger son, born entirely within the new Egyptian power structure.
Exactly. And overlooking the eldest son with deep military connections is a massive gamble. It is the exact scenario that sparks civil wars.
So how does he avoid a war?
He executes the transition with surgical precision. He slowly alienates Keranos, forcing him to eventually flee to a rival court.
He just freezes him out.
Effectively neutralizing the Macedonian faction within Egypt.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just name Ptolemy II his heir and hope for the best.
What does he do?
He installs him as co-regent in 285 BC.
Oh, that's smart.
By sharing the throne while he is still alive, Ptolemy ensures that when he eventually dies, there is absolutely no power vacuum. Ptolemy II is already sitting on the throne, controlling the treasury and the army.
Which leads to a quiet end in January of 282 BC. Ptolemy Sutter dies at the age of 84 or 85.
And to appreciate the magnitude of that, you have to look at his peers. Almost every single one of the Diadochi Alexander's successors died violently.
Right, they all killed each other?
They fell in battle, they were assassinated by their own troops, so they were executed.
Yeah.
For a Macedonian warlord to die of old age, in his own bed, having successfully transferred a stable, wealthy kingdom to his chosen heir, it's an astonishing statistical anomaly.
It really forces you to rethink what constitutes a successful reign. I mean, we started this deep dive with the cinematic image of a bodyguard hijacking a golden carriage in the desert.
Right.
But the dramatic heist was really just the entry fee. The real work was administrative.
Completely. He utilized geographic choke points at the Nile, engineered a fiat currency to trap foreign wealth, deployed the Library of Alexandria as a tool of intellectual supremacy, and weaponized his own memoirs.
If you take away anything from this, let it be how you evaluate power. True imperial longevity rarely relies on a conqueror's sword. It relies on the ledgers, the supply lines, and the tax codes that keep the machine running when the charismatic founder is gone.
And it relies on the narratives we blindly accept. This is a fascinating final thought.
Yeah.
We've seen how Ptolemy used his eyewitness history to carefully construct his own image and literally rewrite the Mediterranean's memory of his rivals.
Right, using papyrus and patronage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, if a single ruler in the ancient world could orchestrate a 2,000-year legacy just by monopolizing the physical archives, what does that mean for us today?
Oh, wow.
In a digital age, where data isn't locked in a library in Alexandria, but distributed on servers that can be subtly altered, shadow banned, or rewritten with a keystroke.
That is terrifying. We trust the digital record even more than Arian trusted a king. But the person who controls the algorithm is essentially just a modern Ptolemy holding the pen.
It's the ultimate lesson in narrative control. The hostile takeover doesn't end when you secure the assets or build the moat.
No, it ends when you write the official history, leaving everyone else as a footnote in the dust.